Hey cake chums, and welcome back to another video. This week I'm working on a rather special cake, and while I'm doing it I thought I'd show you guys how I create my realistic wood effect on my cake boards. Let's get to the video. Now, realistic wood effect is probably the finish that I use the most on my cakes. I love the fact that it can be used for a sculpted cake, a more kind of traditional cake, and even for wedding cakes. Now, just like real wooden floorboards, your cake board doesn't have to be the traditional brown shade. So today I'm going to be using grey sugar paste and black airbrush colour to create a really nice subtle pale grey effect. Without much further ado, let's get cracking. Now, of course, the internet is practically littered with different ways that you can create a realistic wood effect on your cake boards, but I like to keep things simple. So rather than using an impression mat or a textured rolling pin, I like to use one of these. That's it, just the basic PME leaf and veining tool, also known as the Dresden tool. We'll be using this to apply all of the texture, and then I'll show you how I can use just a ruler and an edge scraper to add in the rest of the texture. It's also going to give us a great chance to have a play with the brand new PME portable airbrush kit. But before we get to that, we need to roll out some paste. So as I said, today we're going to be creating a pale grey wood effect because the cake that I'm going to be putting on this is a really nice kind of pale pink, white and grey colour palette. So I thought a pale grey wood effect cake board would look absolutely stunning. Now we're using Renshaw Extra Sugar Paste today, which is a really nice elastic paste that's really easy to use. And I've coloured it with just a tiny little bit of the Rainbow Dust concentrated food gel colour in grey. As always, to roll out my sugar paste, I'm just going to dust the worktop with plenty of corn flour in my little pouch. Now, because this paste is very elastic, as you saw in my how to cover a cake video, we can sometimes get air bubbles, but you just grab a needle or a pin. I'm using an acupuncture needle, just slide it into the side of the bubble and just push the air out. Definitely got too much sugar paste here. So I'm gonna have plenty of excess, but that's not a problem because I'll be able to use it on the rest of the cake. So I've rolled my paste out to about 5 mil thick, if you can see that. And that's great because that's going to give us plenty of depth to work in our texture in just a moment. To attach this to the cake board, I'm simply going to brush it with a little bit of water and then pop the paste straight on. I'm going to smooth the paste down using our fondant smoother. Make sure it's nice and firmly attached. And then we can trim off the excess using a sharp knife. I'm not going to be too neat about this at the moment, and the reason why will become very clear in just a moment. The rest of this paste can be kept to use again. Just make sure you pop it in an airtight bag so that it doesn't dry out. Now we get to the fun bit. I'm going to place the sugar paste covered board onto a turntable, and then grabbing your cake tool, we're simply going to start making parallel marks, starting roughly in the centre out to the edge of the board. Now they don't need to be perfectly straight, so don't panic about that at all. You just want to put in as many as you can. I'm not really thinking about what I'm doing at all. I'm just starting at one side, working my way across, and then going back to the beginning and doing it some more. What we're doing is creating all the kind of grooves and textures and marks that you see when you look at a plank of wood. You can try doing some small ones just right at the edge. And if you've got any bits where there are particularly big gaps with no marks, just slowly go back over those, adding in some extra texture. When you're kind of happy with where it's going, turn the board around, face the other direction, and do exactly the same thing again. And then when you've got it to somewhere that you're starting to feel kind of happy with the two sides, go straight across the middle from one side to the other just to kind of blend any obvious divisions between the two. Now at the moment it's probably not really looking like anything at all, but that's absolutely fine, that's what we're expecting. At the moment it is purely all about this texture that we're trying to create. Don't be afraid to go back over bits that you've already done if you want to kind of make them a bit more rough and informal. This does give you a kind of a very rough style of floor. I don't think your floorboards would really be this lumpy and bumpy, but I tell you what, it looks fabulous underneath a beautiful cake. Once you've got yourself to kind of this stage, I'll show you there, and I'll show you up here. What we want to do now is work our way around the outside of the board with our sharp knife, and we're going to do a much neater trim. So just starting in one place, and just like I've talked about in previous videos, we're only running the knife downwards. We don't want to saw that knife because you'll start to pull the sugar paste away from the board. If you find that you get some residue building up on the knife, that's absolutely fine. Just grab a clean tea towel or a piece of kitchen roll or something and just wipe that off, and then carry on. We are going to do this again one more time in a moment, so don't panic if there's any bits that you're not overly happy with. We can always neaten them up in a second. Now to create the planks on my cake board, I like to use a ruler. And I have this really cool metal one, which is a safety ruler that is designed to be used with a craft knife. You can use any type of ruler, or if you don't have a ruler, you can of course use an edge scraper or anything else that is long and thin. Now to actually make the floorboard marks into the cake board, we're going to roughly line the ruler up parallel with the marks that you've already made, and then push it down into the paste, almost down to the cake board. Then lift it back out and decide where you want to make your next mark. Make sure you keep them parallel and push it in again. Now the tricky part is to try and make sure you keep those boards roughly even. Once you've done that, I like to go back to my flour and veining tool and just run it down through those marks to make them a bit more pronounced and to soften any edges. You can do that from the other direction as well. And there we have it, our first boards. Now, of course, you could leave it like this. It depends on the size of boards you want to create. If you were doing long floorboards, you could just leave it like this. Or you can now flip from the ruler to an edge scraper and add some cross grooves or divisions as well. Now, these rarely line up with each other. So if you look at real floorboards, you'll see that they tend to just be quite random. So I'm going to start just over here, and this time I'm running perpendicular to the grooves. And then going back to the modelling tool, just refreshing the marks that we'd already made and softening the edges of the new ones. Now they're looking pretty square at the moment, and if you want a smarter looking floor, that's fine. Otherwise, what we can do is go in and try and just gently round off these corners slightly, and that will give you that slightly more rustic feel. And if you want to make it even more kind of rustic and old looking, you can then use your modelling tool to really add some extra definition at these edges. Don't panic if the paste starts to pull apart, because all you need to do is just run your tool back in the opposite direction and it will pull back together again. Repeat that on all of the perpendicular divisions until you are happy. And then last job, just really go over those lines one more time to make sure that you haven't closed them up too much. Now if you want to add even more texture to your cake board, what you can also do is take your modelling tool and just pop it into the paste at an angle, like so, and then move it in a circular motion, lifting it slightly to create some knots just like this one. Try not to go overboard, 1 or 2 at most is best. Other than that, it can start to look a little bit contrived. You can also use your modelling tool to add in some small circles to give the effect of nail marks if you want to. Now once you've got your board to this stage, it is ready for airbrushing, and the great thing is you can airbrush it while it is still soft. You don't have to let it dry. If you don't have an airbrush, you might prefer to use dry dust colours, but for those I do tend to let the board dry first, simply because otherwise the brush could distort some of this texture that we spent ages building up. As I said earlier in the video though, I'm going to use this board as an excuse to have a play with the PME portable airbrush kit that you saw in last week's video. So let's crack it out and see what it's like. Now when it comes to airbrushing in black, particularly with a single action airbrush, I can tend to be a little bit heavy-handed. So my top tip, if you're anything like me, is to dilute your airbrush colour using a little bit of some high alcohol liquid, such as dipping solution or rejuvenator fluid. Now today I'm using the Rainbow Dust liquid colour in black, and I'm mixing that with just a little bit of dipping solution to make a watered down version of the black colour. Now don't panic, it will still look very, very dark, but I promise you it will help. So I'm going to pop that liquid into the airbrush and I'm going to pop the cap on. If you have a cap on your airbrush, I do recommend using it because it will stop you, hopefully, splashing the airbrush colour onto the board if you start to move it around a bit erratically. Another good tip is to keep a piece of clean kitchen roll in your other hand when you're airbrushing, because that will allow you to kind of check what sort of stream you're getting out, check what the colour's looking like before you start applying it to your cake. If you're using an airbrush that perhaps hasn't been cleaned particularly well the last time you used it, it could be a bit spluttery, and the last thing you want to do is discover that while you're actually working on the board or on the cake itself. So by having that piece of clean kitchen roll in your hand, it means you can find out before you go anywhere near a cake. So I've got my brand new PME portable airbrush here. It's charged, it's loaded with colour, so I'm going to press the button to turn it on, and let's see what it's coming out like. So I'm going to start applying colour by just running the airbrush down all of the grooves that I've made from above. Gosh, it's definitely going to take some getting used to having this big weight in my hand. I'm then going to do exactly the same in the perpendicular grooves as well. And if I was doing a much more natural kind of wood effect board, I would use exactly the same technique. I would have just started probably either with a white or a very, very pale brown colour, perhaps using the Renshaw Teddy Bear Brown. And then once I've gone through all of these grooves, I'm going to go over them again, but this time holding the airbrush at an angle and working across the wood What that will do is pick up all of that texture that I spent ages working into the board. And then flip it around and do the same thing again from the other side. And then again going across the perpendicular ones as well. And then finally I'm just going to do a light coat all the way around the edge as well, like so. Again, you'll notice that I'm not spraying directly, I'm almost holding the airbrush at an angle and moving the cake board around. You can also highlight the knots by spraying directly into the centre of them and then just moving the airbrush in a circle around to pick up the edges. And that is as simple as it is. Now you will see very much that I've gone for a very kind of subtle pale effect on this board because the cake that's going on it is very pale and pastel as well. If you were doing a sculpted cake on a kind of a more darker wooden effect board, you can of course use more colour or you can just not water it down, but for this cake it definitely wouldn't work. As I said earlier on as well, if you don't have an airbrush, then you can just let the paste on the board dry first and then using a nice fluffy brush, just work that powder colour down the edges of all of these grooves. And what you'll find is by using a larger, fluffier brush, it will concentrate that colour into the centre of the groove and just give you a light kind of dusting around the sides like I've achieved here with the airbrush. Now, if you found that quite tricky to follow because either I was going too fast or just because these pale colours perhaps don't show up in this lighting, then I do have a full photo tutorial for this effect on my website as well, and I'll link that down in the description box below. But that is pretty much it. How to create a wood effect cake board using a modelling tool, a ruler and an airbrush. I do hope you enjoyed that video, and if you'd like to see more kind of simple tutorials like this, make sure you give this video a thumbs up. Now before you go, I did promise that this week I would be announcing the winner of my Global Sugar Art paintbrushes giveaway. Now if you missed the original giveaway video, you won't have seen that I have got 2 gorgeous sets of the Global Sugar Artists Network paintbrushes to give away. One set right here on YouTube and one over on Instagram TV, or IGTV, whatever we're calling it. You guys entered in your droves and I am thrilled to announce that the YouTube winner is, drumroll, on the screen at the bottom right now. And the Instagram winner is also on the screen right now. If you are one of the lucky winners, do please get in touch through social media. All the links are down in the description box below. And if you missed out this time, don't worry. I regularly run giveaways here on my channel, so make sure you've hit that subscribe button and rang the bell so that you can stay up to date with when the next one happens. In the meantime, thank you so much to everyone who entered my Global Sugar Artists Network competition, and thank you too to the Global Sugar Artists Network for making it possible. Now I guess I'd better get back to working on this cake, and I'll see you guys next time. Take care.